The sun had just begun its slow descent beyond the horizon, staining the wide African sky in hues of orange, red, and gold. A warm breeze danced through the tall grasses of the savannah, whispering secrets that only the wind seemed to know. Beneath this fiery canvas lay the village of Ikangu, nestled between the thick trees of the ancient forest and the open plains that stretched endlessly beyond. Ikangu was small, no more than a scattering of clay huts with thatched roofs, but it pulsed with life, tradition, and stories as old as the soil itself. The people of Ikangu lived simply, tending crops, raising animals, and gathering water from the stream that curled around the edge of the forest like a silver ribbon. Children ran barefoot, their laughter echoing off the mud walls, while elders sat in shaded corners spinning tales that had been passed down for generations. It was through these stories that the soul of Ikangu endured, rooted in memory and myth. But not all stories were meant to soothe. Some were whispered only after dark, when the fires burned low and the shadows crept in like spirits. These were the stories of the beast of the forest, a creature of nightmares cloaked in fur and silence. No one alive had ever truly seen it, but all claimed to know its form, a monstrous shadow with eyes like burning coal and claws that could rend flesh from bone. It walked on two legs but not like a man. It had the breath of a lion and the hunger of 1,000 ghosts. It comes when the moon is fullest, the elders warned, their eyes narrowed like slits. It knows when fear is strongest, and it remembers. Generations ago, it was said, the beast was summoned by betrayal. A broken promise, a selfish act, a failure to honor the ancient ways. These, the villagers believed, had awakened something that should have never been disturbed. Every decade since, as if answering some terrible call, the beast returned to take what it believed was owed. A girl, young and pure, locked inside the hut of silence until dawn. If she survived, the village would know peace. If not, the forest would bleed out into the land and ruin would follow. The hut stood at the border between the village and the forest, a small structure built from sacred wood and charmed stones, abandoned by all but legend. It had no windows, only a single door with a carved locking mechanism that could not be opened from the inside. No one ever visited it, not even during the day. It was a place of dread, of memory, and of penance. As the 10-year mark approached, the air in Ikangu began to shift. Birds no longer sang near the forest edge. Animals grew restless. Mothers clutched their daughters tighter. And in the deepest hours of night, when all else slept, the distant howl of something ancient broke through the silence like a blade through fabric. The elders gathered again. Fires were lit. Names were whispered. Among those names was Nia. She was barely 16, the daughter of a weaver and a midwife. Her laughter was soft, her footsteps lighter than leaves, and her heart was known for its kindness. But fate, it seemed, did not measure worth by goodness. It measured silence, timing, and balance. And the old gods, if they still watched, had marked Nia with invisible ink that only the beast could see. In Ikangu, no one ever dared speak against tradition, not openly. The ancestors had carved their warnings into the bones of the village. And now, as the moon began to swell in the sky and the wind carried tales of fur and fong, everyone knew what must be done. The forest waited. The hut waited. And somewhere deep in the dark, the beast had begun to move. Nia had always been different. While other children in Ikangu raced through the fields chasing dragonflies or splashing through the stream with wild laughter, Nia preferred the quiet companionship of stories and sky. She would sit under the acacia tree near her family's hut, her fingers busy with palm fibers as she wove intricate patterns into baskets, humming soft melodies no one else seemed to know. Her eyes were deep and observant, like she could see what others missed. The small sadness in a smile, the tremor in a hand, the secrets the wind whispered when it passed through the reeds. Her mother, Liso, was the village midwife, respected and always in motion, her hands catching life and comforting pain in equal measure. Her father, Thibaut, was a weaver, strong and quiet, often seen hunched over his loom while the rhythms of the village pulsed around him. Nia was their only child, born after years of silence and loss. Some said she was a gift. Others said she came too late, when the old balance had already shifted. From an early age, Nia was drawn to the stories the elders told, especially the ones others feared. While the younger children would run off at the mention of beasts and curses, Nia would sit still, listening to every word, her wide eyes fixed on the wrinkled mouths that spun the tales. She remembered every detail, the way the moon hung over the hut the first time the beast came, how the girl who was chosen then, a girl named Salo, was never found again. She remembered the whispers of a curse passed down every decade, a cycle never broken. Once, when she was just 10, she had asked the village elder Mboma, a man so old his back bent like a broken tree, why the beast always came. He had looked at her long and hard, his eyes like stones sunk in the riverbed. Because the earth remembers what we forget, he said. Because balance must be fed. That night, Nia dreamt of fireflies flying in circles, forming the shape of a beast's face. Now at 16, Nia had grown into a quiet strength. Her hands were deft, her thoughts sharp, and though she rarely spoke out of turn, when she did, people listened. There was a calmness in her presence, something grounded and ancient. Children came to her when they were afraid. Animals followed her like she carried bread in her pockets. And more than once, strangers visiting from neighboring villages had looked at her with something between curiosity and awe. Still, Nia never felt entirely at home. She often woke in the night with a heaviness in her chest, as if something vast and invisible sat watching her. The birds outside her window sometimes stopped singing when she passed. Dreams came often, vivid and strange, visions of dark forests, silver eyes, and voices calling her name from far, far away. Her mother noticed. She would brush Nia's hair and say things like, "Your spirit walks with one foot in another world," or "You carry the echo of something unfinished." Her father, more silent in his love, built her a small stool just for stargazing. "If you must look at the heavens," he said, "at least be comfortable doing it." As the day of choosing approached, tension thickened in the village like the air before a storm. The signs were being read. Chickens laid eggs with blood-speckled shells. A baby was born with a thin veil over its face. The stream turned murky 3 mornings in a row. These were omens. Everyone knew it. The elders gathered more frequently, their voices low, their glances wary. When Boma summoned Nia's parents to the council fire one night, no one needed to ask why. Nia wasn't told what was said. But she saw it in her mother's eyes when she returned home, eyes swollen with tears she tried to hide. Her father said nothing, just took her hand and held it longer than usual, his thumb tracing circles into her palm. That night, Nia sat beneath the stars again, but her heart beat like a drum in a war dance. The next morning Boma came to her directly. He walked slowly, leaning on his staff of carved ebony, each step deliberate. The whole village watched from doorways and alleys, their breaths held like secrets. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked her, voice thin but steady. Nia nodded. She did. She always had. He placed a hand on her head, muttering words in a language older than the soil. "It is not punishment," he said. "It is path. Some are chosen by fear. Others by fate. You are chosen by the silence that follows both." That evening, the moon rose heavy and full, and the final preparations began. Nia did not cry. She braided her own hair. She wore the white cloth her mother had woven. She kissed her father's hand and whispered to her mother, "I will see what no one else has seen." And as the firelight flickered in the distance, Nia walked toward the forest's edge, her shadow long behind her, her destiny waiting just beyond the trees. In Ikangu, tradition was not simply remembered, it was lived. Every step taken on its dusty paths, every song sung at the fireside, and every story told beneath the moon carried the weight of ancestry. Time did not move forward in Ikangu, it circled like a hawk above, always returning to its beginning. The villagers believed that to survive, one had to honor the past, no matter how cruel its legacy. And among all the stories passed down, none was heavier, more feared, than the tale of the beast and the hut. It was said that long ago, when Ikangu was young, the forest and the people lived in harmony. The land gave generously, sweet fruits, fat game, clean water, and the people gave thanks with offerings and song. But something changed. A chief's daughter went missing, a sacred tree was cut down in greed, or perhaps a promise made to the forest was broken. No one could say for sure anymore. The details had faded like chalk in rain. What remained was the consequence. A great silence fell over the village. Crops withered. Storms came unseasonably. And then the beast arrived. Some said it came from the forest's deepest root. Others believed it was sent by the gods themselves, a guardian twisted by betrayal. It took the first girl in the night and left only a trail of blood and claw marks behind. The elders, terrified, consulted the spirits and were told the only path to peace was through sacrifice. Once every 10 years they must offer a girl to the beast. One night in the hut. One girl alone. If the girl survived until morning, the beast's rage would be soothed. The village would be spared. If not, well, the forest would remember. The hut where the sacrifice took place was built with sacred wood from trees that bled white sap and had been blessed by the oldest bloodline. It stood just where the savanna kissed the forest's edge, close enough for the beast to come, but far enough that no villager would dare trespass. It had no windows. Only a single door, carved with ancestral sigils and locked from the outside with a braided rope of goat sinew and iron charms. For 9 nights leading up to the full moon, drums would echo at sundown. The women would sweep the paths clean. The men would burn herbs to purify the air. And the elders would fast and chant to the spirits for guidance. On the 9th night, the village gathered before the sacred tree in silence, a fire burning in the center. Boma, or whoever the oldest elder was at the time, would toss bones into the flames and read the ash, searching for signs. A name would emerge, not spoken but known, heavy in the air like thunder before a storm. This time that name had been Nia. The announcement was never formal. The chosen girl would know. She would feel it in her bones. The villagers would avert their eyes. Her family would weep behind closed doors. There was no escaping it. No one had ever run. To run was to curse the entire village, and no one could carry that weight. The fear was not just of the beast, it was of dishonor, of spiritual collapse. The people of Ikangu feared being forgotten by the ancestors more than they feared death. So the ritual continued, decade after decade, unbroken. The last chosen girl had been Tari, a bright flame of a child with a voice like birdsong. That was 10 years ago. She never came back. The forest had kept her. Now it was Nia's turn. As the final night approached, Ikangu moved slowly. Children were kept indoors. Conversations were hushed. Food was left outside the hut as offerings. Smoke from ritual fires hung in the air, clinging to skin and memory. The air itself seemed to tremble. And each time a twig cracked in the forest, every heart in the village skipped a beat. No one ever questioned the ritual. They feared the curse too deeply. They had seen what happened when the offering failed: disease, drought, the river running dry. They believed in the beast because they had to. Because it was easier to fear something ancient than to challenge the silence of their ancestors. And so, as the full moon swelled to its brightest, Ikangu braced itself. Nia stood at the center of the circle one final time. The drums fell silent. The wind paused. And without a word, she walked toward the hut, her bare feet brushing against the dirt that had carried so many before her. Behind her, the village held its breath. Ahead of her, the forest waited. The day Nia was to be taken to the sacred hut, the sky wore a strange hue, neither fully blue nor clouded, but tinted with a copper light that made everything look older, worn, as though the very air remembered what was to come. Ikangu was silent. No children played. No birds sang. Smoke curled upward from cooking fires, but no one ate. The entire village moved with the stillness of morning. Nia rose early before the sun, and bathed herself in the stream as tradition dictated. The water was cold, biting, and dark with silt, but she did not shiver. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she slipped on the white linen garment her mother had woven, a simple wrap that clung to her slight frame, tied at the waist with braided twine. Her mother helped fasten it with hands that had delivered life, now preparing for the possibility of death. Her father said nothing. He simply embraced her once, tightly, and placed in her palm a small carved charm, a lion's head, worn smooth from his years of handling it during prayer. At noon the drums began. Slow, steady, deliberate. The beat echoed through the village like a second heartbeat. The elders emerged first, their cloaks of bark cloth and feathers rustling faintly in the breeze. Boma stood at the front, tall despite his age, leaning on the staff passed down from elder to elder. Behind him came the villagers, a silent procession, faces downturned. No one looked at Nia directly. She was led to the hut at the forest's edge, walking barefoot between 2 lines of flaming torches. Women sang low, wordless chants, harmonizing with the beat of the drums. It was not a song of farewell. It was a song of sealing, of closure. A hymn meant to bind fate, to harden the heart. The hut of silence loomed ahead. It looked ordinary at first glance, small, round, its mud brick walls dry and cracked from years of weathering. But upon closer view, it was clear this was no ordinary place. The door was framed in carved symbols, spirals, eyes, teeth, vines, that seemed to shift in the light. Strange bones hung from the eaves, rattling faintly in the windless air. The ground surrounding the hut had been swept clean of grass, and white chalk symbols snaked around it in tight, protective circles. The inside of the hut was pitch black. It had no windows. Only a few palm mats lined the floor. A small gourd of water had been placed in one corner, beside a bundle of dried herbs. That was all. Boma approached her and raised his hand. The ancestors watch. The forest remembers. Your steps from here are no longer yours alone. Nia nodded once. Her voice had abandoned her, tucked itself deep in her chest. But her feet moved forward. She stepped into the darkness. The door shut behind her with a dull thud. Then came the lock, a sound of scraping wood, the turning of charms, and the binding of rope. She was sealed inside. At first it was the silence that struck her. Total, oppressive. Even the drums had stopped. The darkness pressed in from all sides, and for a long while, Nia simply sat, breathing quietly, waiting for her eyes to adjust. They didn't. There was no light to help them. She could barely see her hands before her. Her only company was the sound of her own breath, and the faint ticking of her heart inside her ears. Time moved slowly. Or not at all. The air grew hotter, heavier. Nia counted her breaths, tried to remember the stories, the warnings, the prayers her mother had whispered to her that morning. But memory became slippery in the dark. Minutes felt like hours. Then came the sounds. First, the faint rustling of leaves, almost imperceptible. Then a crunch, a footstep, just beyond the hut's perimeter. Nia sat up straight, her body suddenly alert, skin prickling with awareness. Her fingers curled around her father's lion charm. Another sound. A low, rhythmic thump, like the earth was being tapped by something immense and slow. Then silence again. Her breath caught in her throat. Something was approaching. It moved like no man, no beast she had ever known. Heavy but smooth. Its steps were deliberate, slow, and terrible in their certainty. She could hear the faint rasp of its breath, thick and ragged, growing louder with each passing second. She crouched low to the ground, pressed against the cool mud wall, heart hammering. Then, a sound at the door. A deep sniff like air being pulled through a tunnel. Then another. Nia squeezed the charm tighter, her knuckles white. Suddenly there was a scraping against the door, like claws testing the wood. Once, twice. Then silence. Total, unbearable silence. Nia's body trembled, but she did not cry. She forced her breathing to slow. She pressed her forehead to the ground and whispered one of her mother's prayers. Let the earth hold me. Let the silence pass through me. Let the night see only my shape. Something moved just outside again. Then, a sound unlike any other. A growl, not of anger, not of hunger, but deep, guttural, and mournful. As if the very forest had sighed. Pause. And then, with a creak of strained wood, Nia heard it. The beast was lying down. Right outside the door. No attack. No tearing of wood. No claws reaching through the cracks. Only breath. Slow. Heavy. Steady. It was waiting. Nia remained frozen, every nerve alert but no longer certain of what to fear. Time passed again, undefined. Somewhere in the night, a soft wind brushed the walls of the hut. The beast did not move. And neither did she. The air inside the hut had become thick and warm, clinging to Nia's skin like a second layer. The silence after the beast's arrival was maddening, an unnatural quiet that stretched time and stifled thought. Her ears strained for every sound, her body caught in a tension so sharp it felt like her bones would crack under its weight. She dared not move. Not even to adjust the position that had grown uncomfortable from crouching against the wall. Every creak of her joints, every breath she dared draw felt like it echoed too loudly in the dark. The only sound beyond the hut was the slow, rhythmic breathing of something massive just outside the door, something with lungs larger than any living creature Nia had ever known. She counted its breaths. 4 seconds in. A slight pause. 6 seconds out. A low huff followed by a faint rumble, like distant thunder rolling in its chest. The beast was still there. She closed her eyes as if that would shield her from what waited just beyond the wall. She didn't know what she had expected. Perhaps that it would burst through the door in a flurry of rage and teeth. Or that it would tear the thatch from the roof and snatch her into the night. That was what the stories had said. That was what had happened to Tari. To Salo. But nothing had happened yet. Nothing except the soft, unwavering presence of something watching, breathing, waiting. Then, without warning, the breath stopped. Nia's eyes flew open in the dark. The silence rang louder than a scream. A soft scraping began outside, a dragging sound like claws or perhaps thick fingers running across the surface of the hut. It started at the base of the door and moved slowly around the structure's perimeter, tracing a circle. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She held the lion charm tighter, its edges pressing deep into her palm. Her entire body tensed, ready for the door to splinter open. Instead, the scraping stopped behind her, just outside the back wall. Then came a low growl. It was not angry. It was long, low, and full of weight. A sound like the earth groaning beneath ancient roots. The air in the hut vibrated with it, the floor buzzing faintly beneath her fingertips. The growl turned into a series of short, breathy chuffs, as if the beast was scenting the air, checking, tasting the edges of her fear. Nia pressed herself lower, her cheek against the ground, barely breathing. She didn't scream. Something deep within her told her not to. That screaming would make her prey. That silence was her shield. The growl faded again. Then footsteps. Soft for something so large but heavy. One after the other, each step muffled but sure. They circled the hut once more. Her mind filled in the image. A hulking shape, broad-shouldered and low to the ground, fur slick with night dew, eyes glowing with some otherworldly fire. Something neither man nor animal, cursed and ancient. Suddenly she heard the beast stop, right in front of the door. Nia sat up just enough to see the outline of light beneath the hut's threshold. Something blocked the moonlight, something huge. Then the beast lay down. She heard it clearly, the slow descent of a great weight settling onto the earth, the groan of limbs folding under muscle, the faint whumph as its body hit the ground. It exhaled long and loud, its breath curling beneath the door. Nia blinked, confused. Her breath caught. She didn't dare believe what her senses told her. The beast wasn't coming in. It was resting? More than that, it was guarding the door. The realization dawned slowly. Its placement was deliberate. It lay directly in front of the entrance, its breathing returning to that steady, grounded rhythm. She leaned in closer, just a hand's width from the door now, and though she couldn't see it, she felt it. Its presence, its heat, the strange pulse of something intelligent behind those breaths. It was keeping watch. Nia sat back against the far wall, her body still coiled with tension, but her fear no longer held the same edge. The silence now was different, thick yes but not threatening. It had an expectant quality, as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting for her to understand. This wasn't an execution. This was a vigil. The stories had always spoken of the beast as a mindless devourer, a cursed monster that consumed innocence. But what if they had been wrong? Or what if they had only known part of the truth? A low whine escaped from outside, a strange sound. Mournful. Almost lonely. It didn't last long, but it settled into Nia's chest like a seed. She didn't know what this creature was, what it wanted, or what curse had shaped it, but she could feel one thing with certainty. It had not come to hurt her. The beast breathed. Nia watched the door. And outside, the forest stood still, cradled in the silence of something ancient and unnamed. Nia sat with her back against the hut's wall, her arms wrapped around her knees, trying to keep herself from shaking. Though the air was warm, a chill crawled beneath her skin and settled in her bones. The stillness was too complete, too unnatural. The only movement came from her own body, small tremors in her hands, the flutter of her chest with every breath, the subtle twitch of her eyes as they strained to pierce the dark. And outside the beast. She could still hear it, its breathing slow and steady. It hadn't moved since it lay down before the door. Every few minutes, its exhale would deepen, vibrating slightly against the wood, like a sigh carved from stone. But it didn't sleep. Nia could tell. There was a sharpness to its stillness, a kind of alertness in the way it remained rooted in place. Every so often, she heard the faint twitch of its ears, or the soft scrape of claws adjusting their grip on the dirt. She wasn't sure how much time had passed since it arrived. The darkness inside the hut was so complete that time felt like a fading idea. Nothing to mark the hours but the rhythm of breath on the other side of the wall and the slow melting of her own fear. At first, her thoughts had been a tangle of panic. Her mind had filled with images of fangs tearing through the door, of a massive claw reaching through the cracks to drag her into the night. She had imagined herself like the others, Tari, Salo, gone by morning, nothing left but blood and silence. But the moments ticked on. The attack never came. The door remained closed. The beast remained outside. So she watched, listened, breathed. Her heartbeat, once a wild drumbeat, began to slow. Her eyes adjusted not to the light, there was none, but to the rhythm of darkness. She began to notice the small sounds her fear had drowned out before. The creak of the hut's frame in the wind, the whisper of tree branches beyond the thatched roof, the occasional shuffle of small night creatures skittering in the underbrush. And always, beneath it all, the guardian presence just outside. She found herself leaning toward the door now, rather than away from it. What was it? What kind of creature would be summoned by ancient ritual, expected to devour a girl, and then simply lie down and stay? No beast from the stories ever acted this way. In the tales, it had red eyes and a mouth full of tusks. It roared and broke trees with its breath. But this thing breathed like it carried sorrow. It hadn't made a sound in hours. Not a growl. Not a snarl. Just breath. Watchful and steady. Nia's fingers found the lion charm in her lap again. She rubbed it between her palms slowly, absent-mindedly, the smooth surface oddly comforting. Her father's gift, his silent prayer pressed into wood. She wondered what he was doing right now, if he was staring at the moon or sitting in the dark like she was, trying not to think of dawn. She imagined the village too. No doubt they were awake. The elders praying, the people holding back tears, families clinging to their loved ones, too afraid to hope. She wondered if anyone else had ever lived through the night. If perhaps one of the chosen had also been spared, and the truth had simply been buried beneath fear. The beast shifted slightly and Nia froze again, but the sound was small, a paw turning in the dirt, a soft exhale. Protective, not restless. It was guarding her. She knew it now. She couldn't explain how she knew, but she felt it, like a thread running from her chest to the other side of the door. She was not prey. She was under watch. Curiosity began to bloom in the place fear had lived. What kind of being gave up sleep to stand sentinel for a stranger? What sort of curse or vow held it in this place? What was its story? Nia leaned her head back against the wall and whispered, so low that even she barely heard the words. "Who are you?" There was no answer. Not with words. But the breath on the other side of the door deepened once, then steadied again. And somehow she understood. The beast had been waiting for that question. The night deepened. Shadows held. And the hut, once a prison, began to feel less like a tomb and more like a chamber of truth, quiet, sacred, and patient. The first fingers of dawn had not yet reached the horizon, but the forest air had begun to shift. The stillness of midnight gave way to the faint stirring of life, rustling leaves, distant bird calls, the low murmur of wind through the trees. Inside the hut, Nia had not slept, but she no longer felt tired. The long night had dulled her fear and awakened something else in her, an alertness, a sense that something important was unfolding, something deeper than tradition or myth. And then, just as the sky began to pale with the promise of light, she heard it. A low, painful grunt from the other side of the door. Not a growl. She had come to recognize the beast's various tones by now. This one was different. Raw, strained. Followed by a shuffle, then a thump. The sound of something heavy collapsing sideways in the dirt. Nia stood quickly and crossed the hut, crouching beside the door. She pressed her ear against the wood and listened. The beast was still breathing, but the rhythm had changed. Each inhale came with a rasp, each exhale with a low hum of discomfort. Something was wrong. Without thinking, Nia reached for the bundle of dried herbs that had been left for her in the hut. Ritual offerings, perhaps, or tools for endurance. She sifted through the bundle and found a few sprigs of Leone, a plant known for its soothing oil, and kaffir root, used by her mother in poultices for swelling and wounds. Her fingers worked from memory, crushing, mixing, wrapping. Her body moved as if her mother were guiding her hands. Then she froze. What was she doing? The stories had always painted the beast as a terror, a creature born to punish and devour. And yet here she was, preparing medicine. For another sound came from outside. A pained shuffle. A quiet whimper, so subtle, so deeply buried in restraint, it almost broke her heart. Nia's fear had melted into something else. Empathy. She pressed her hand flat against the door. Her voice trembled, but it carried strength. "You're hurt," she said softly. "Let me help you." No answer came, but the breathing calmed slightly. Nia hesitated only a moment longer before she reached for the carved locking charms. They were heavy, strung together with cords and talismans. Tradition screamed at her not to touch them. The village would never forgive her if she opened the door. But tradition, she now understood, had been blind for generations. She began untying the knots. The final charm fell away, and the door creaked open with an ancient groan. The forest greeted her with a breath of cool, damp air and the soft gray light of pre-dawn. And there, lying just beyond the threshold, was the beast. It was even larger than she had imagined, twice the height of a man when standing, though now it lay curled, tense and watchful. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur that shifted in hues between black and deep rust. Its limbs were massive, tipped with claws dulled not by time but restraint. Its face, part feline, part canine, part something older than language, turned to her with glowing amber eyes. But what caught her breath were the wounds. One leg was badly torn, a deep gash leaking slow rivulets of blood. Scars lined its flank, some healed, others raw. Along its ribs the fur was thinned, exposing bruised skin beneath. Its breath came in shallow pulls, each one laced with pain. Nia stepped forward carefully. The beast did not move. It watched her, still and silent, but its eyes were no longer wild. They were tired. She knelt beside its injured leg, setting down the bundle of herbs and preparing the salve. Her hands trembled, but she did not stop. "I don't know what you are," she whispered, crushing the kaffir root into paste. "But you didn't hurt me. And you've been alone for too long." The beast blinked slowly. Then, so gently it was barely perceptible, it shifted its paw to give her better access to the wound. Nia's breath caught. She cleaned the gash with water from her gourd, wincing as the beast flinched. Then she pressed the herbs into the wound, speaking to it softly as her mother had once spoken to frightened mothers in labor. "You've been carrying something for so long, haven't you?" she murmured. "Is this what they sent you for? Not to kill us, but to carry the curse." The beast did not reply, but it closed its eyes briefly. The tension in its body eased. She wrapped the leg with strips torn from her garment, tying them tightly. Her fingers, though small, were strong, and she worked with the care of someone used to mending what others would throw away. When she finished, she sat beside it in the grass. The beast lay still, its breath no longer ragged. And for the first time since the night began, Nia saw not a monster, not a myth, but a guardian, a prisoner of memory like herself. Something ancient and aching, waiting for someone not to fear it, but to understand it. They watched the forest together as the sky began to lighten. And a bond was born, not from blood or magic or fear, but from kindness offered freely to something no one else had dared to see. The sky had lightened to a soft silver by the time Nia leaned back against the trunk of a nearby tree, her gaze still fixed on the beast that lay beside the hut. The wound on its leg was bound now, the herbs beginning their slow work, but the pain in its body wasn't just physical. She could feel it, deep and old, like grief that had hardened into the marrow. There was a weight to the air around the creature, a sorrow that pulsed with every breath it drew. She sat in silence, not because she had nothing to say, but because it felt wrong to speak. The beast watched her, its amber eyes glinting in the rising light. Not threatening. Not afraid. Simply present. And then, something shifted. A strange warmth filled the air between them, subtle at first, like the soft exhale of wind across warm stone. Nia blinked. The edges of the forest seemed to ripple, not with movement but with memory. Her vision swam for a moment. Then everything grew still again. And the beast's eyes met hers, fully, deeply. A soundless pulse passed between them, not words, not voice, but understanding. It was as if a thread had been drawn from her heart to his, linking them across a bridge built of silence, pain, and something deeper, recognition. In that moment she saw, not with her eyes but through them, images rushing through her mind like water breaking a dam. A younger man, tall and strong, standing at the edge of the village. His skin was the color of dusk, his eyes bright and kind. His name was lost, buried in time, but his purpose burned clear, protector. He had once walked these very paths as a guardian of Ikangu, chosen not by birth but by heart. When outsiders came, threatening the peace of the village, it was he who stood in their way. When disease swept through the crops, it was he who ventured into the sacred parts of the forest to bring back healing roots. He was not a warrior by blood but by choice. But then came the betrayal. The villagers, afraid of his growing power, envious of his favor with the spirits, turned on him. Whispers turned into suspicion. Accusations flew like arrows in the dark. They said he had made a pact with the forest, that he had drawn strength from forbidden places. He was cast out, cursed not by the spirits but by the fear of his own people. The forest had answered their fear with fury. The curse fell upon him like a storm, twisted him into something unrecognizable. First sprouted where skin had been. His voice was taken. His form stretched into a thing neither man nor beast. And for 10 long years he wandered the wilds, howling in agony but never striking back. The forest kept him alive, but the village demanded blood. A cycle was born, fear, offering, silence. Over and over. He had never touched a single girl. Not once. Each one he had watched over, waited beside, protected from the other shadows that moved in the dark. But they never saw. They never stayed long enough to learn. Their terror was too great. Until now. Nia's hands trembled, tears springing to her eyes, not from fear but sorrow. She reached toward the beast, slowly placing her hand just above its paw. "You were never the monster," she whispered. The beast bowed its head. The images faded but the thread remained, binding them still. The curse, she now understood, was not just magic. It was a wound made of broken trust, of compassion unmet, of humanity denied. And the only way to break it was not through ritual or blood, but through seeing, through belief, through mercy. "I believe you," Nia said, her voice low but certain. The beast looked up. A shimmer passed over its body, faint as morning mist. The curse stirred. Not broken, not yet, but loosened like a chain slowly slipping free. For the first time, the beast closed its eyes not from pain, but peace. And Nia sat beside him as the sun began to rise. The first rays of morning sunlight stretched across the plains of Ikangu like golden fingers, brushing the tops of the huts, warming the cool earth and breaking the long hold of night. Birds returned to their songs, tentative and questioning, as if even they weren't sure what they might find at the edge of the forest. The village began to stir, slowly and nervously, with the weight of expectation pressing on every heart. Mothers clutched their children a little closer. Elders murmured prayers beneath their breath. The people did not speak aloud of what they feared. They didn't have to. Every 10 years they had gathered like this, waiting for sunrise, waiting to see if the forest would give back what had been taken. But no one truly expected it. No girl had ever returned. They waited in silence, eyes fixed on the narrow path that led to the sacred hut. The air was thick, buzzing with tension. Even the wind seemed to hold still. Then a shadow appeared. One small figure stepped from the trees, slowly, steadily, her white robe stained with dust and streaks of herb paste. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, her steps sure, her face calm. There was no limp, no wounds, no terror clinging to her eyes. Only quiet strength. It was Nia. Alive. Unharmed. The crowd gasped. A murmur rippled through the villagers like a wave through tall grass. Some took a step forward in disbelief. Others stepped back, clutching amulets, whispering to ancestors, unsure whether they were witnessing a miracle or a curse reborn. And behind her, nothing. No beast. No blood. No tracks. Just morning dew on the grass and the slow hush of awakening forest. Nia walked forward, silent. Her gaze swept the gathered faces. Her mother's tear-streaked cheeks, her father's trembling hands, the wide eyes of the children who had once followed her through the village. She stopped before Mboma, who stood unmoving, the fire of dawn catching in his ancient eyes. He looked at her like a man seeing the impossible. "You," he began, but his voice faltered. Nia shook her head gently. "The beast is gone," she said, voice quiet but clear. "And he was never what we believed." Gasps again. A few elders crossed themselves with fingers and whispered furiously to each other. Others stared at her with a mix of awe and suspicion. "Did it speak to you?" one villager asked. "No," Nia said. "But I saw. And I listened." She held up her palm, revealing the lion charm her father had given her, now warm and worn smooth in the light. "He was cursed for protecting us. He carried our fear so we wouldn't have to." The village fell into stunned silence. No one spoke. The hut stood quiet behind her. The curse had not claimed her, but it had been seen, named, and maybe, just maybe, released. The silence that followed Nia's words was brittle, thin as cracked clay beneath a scorching sun. Then, as if breaking from a spell, the elders erupted. "She speaks in riddles," cried one, his voice shaking with age and fear. "She has been touched by dark spirits," another accused. "No one survives the hut. No one speaks of the beast and walks away whole." Mboma stepped forward, his face unreadable, carved from decades of ritual and memory. "What you say is dangerous, girl. If you lie, you bring chaos. If you speak truth, you threaten everything we know." But Nia did not flinch. "I am not lying," she said, her voice steady. "I sat with him. I looked into his eyes. I saw his pain, how he was once a man, how he protected us and was cursed because of it. The stories we tell are not all true. We turned fear into tradition and never asked why." Some gasped. A few looked away, shaken. But others, especially the younger ones, stared at her with quiet awe. One old woman at the edge of the crowd whispered, "My grandmother said the first beast did not kill. She said he wept." A murmur rippled through the villagers. But the elder who had first accused Nia stepped forward again, voice rising. "You say you healed a demon. You claim a cursed thing deserves compassion. What would you have us do, invite the beast into our homes?" Nia's jaw tightened. "No. But I would have you see what truly lives beyond the trees. I would have you know that mercy is not weakness. That maybe, just maybe, we've been feeding a wound, not a monster." A long pause. Some elders looked at her with contempt. Others with unease. But one child stepped from the crowd and quietly placed a flower at Nia's feet. Another followed. Then a mother clutched her child's hand and nodded. The village was divided, cracked, uncertain, but not unmoved. And Nia stood her ground, not as a witch, not as a liar, but as the first girl who had seen the truth and lived to tell it. In the weeks that followed Nia's return, the village of Ikangu was caught in a strange tension, a quiet pull between disbelief and wonder. The elders kept to their routines, clinging to silence, but the people whispered. The children asked questions they were once too afraid to voice. The hut at the forest's edge, once a place of dread, stood untouched. No offerings, no incense, no drums. Just stillness. Then the changes began. First came the rains, gentle and steady, falling at just the right time. The parched soil drank deeply, and within days the withered fields began to green. Yams grew fat and golden beneath the earth. Cassava leaves stretched wide. Mango trees, which had failed to flower for 2 seasons, began to bear again. Then the sickness lifted. The cough that had plagued the young for months disappeared. Fever stopped sweeping through the village at night. The medicine woman found her herbs more potent, her poultices working faster than they had in years. It was as if the very air had sweetened. People began to look toward the forest with different eyes. They remembered how Nia had returned unscathed, how she had spoken with calm conviction, not madness, how she had touched the untouchable and lived. The fear that once kept them chained to ritual began to loosen, thread by thread. And slowly something new grew in its place: reverence. It was the children who began to leave small gifts at the hut: flowers, carvings, painted stones. Then the women began sweeping the path again, not out of dread, but respect. The men rebuilt the outer wall of the hut with fresh clay, adding smooth stones and bark-carved symbols, not to contain the beast, but to honor what it had carried. And one morning, without discussion, the villagers gathered at the edge of the forest with wood and paint and stone. They built a shrine, not grand but beautiful. At its center stood a carved figure, part lion, part man, part spirit. Its head was bowed, not in shame but in watchfulness. Beside it, a second figure, Nia, carved from dark wood, one hand open, the other holding a charm. At the base of the shrine, they etched simple words in the old tongue. He guarded us. She saw him. We remember. Years would pass and stories would shift again, as they always did. But from that day on, the tale of the beast would no longer be one of terror. It would be one of sorrow, compassion, and the girl who saw the truth and chose to kneel beside it. Years passed, and the village of Ikangu changed, not in great leaps, but in the quiet way the earth shifts beneath growing roots. The old fears faded like mist burned away by sunlight. The story of the beast was no longer whispered with dread beside cooking fires, but told with wonder, with reverence, with pride. Children now learned 2 names together: Nia and the guardian. No longer called a beast, the once feared creature became known as a protector, a spirit bound not by fury but by love, by duty. And Nia, the girl who once trembled in the sacred hut, became more than memory. She became a symbol. Her tale was carved into walls, painted on pots, stitched into the hems of ceremonial robes. Songs were sung in her honor, soft melodies about courage that defied silence, about kindness that reached through fear, and about the power of seeing what others choose to ignore. No girl was ever again sent to the hut. Instead, every 10 years the village held a festival at its door. They brought offerings not of fear but of thanks: bowls of fresh fruit, bright cloth, small wooden carvings of beasts with gentle eyes. Children danced. Elders lit lanterns and told stories under the stars. And always someone recited the tale, the true tale. On one such night, under a velvet sky thick with stars, a small girl sat cross-legged beside her grandmother, eyes wide, the firelight dancing in her pupils. "Tell me again," the girl said, tugging at the old woman's shawl. "Tell me about the girl and the beast." Her grandmother smiled, the lines in her face deepening like rivers traced over time. "Once," she said, "long ago, when our village still feared the dark, a girl named Nia was chosen to be taken to the sacred hut. They thought she would not return, but she did, not just alive but changed. And with her she brought the truth." "About the guardian?" the girl whispered. "Yes," the old woman nodded. "The one who had protected us even when we called him monster. The one cursed for loving us too deeply." The child leaned closer. "But how did she break the curse?" "Not with magic. With compassion," her grandmother said softly. "She saw him, not as a creature but as a soul in pain. She listened. She helped. And when no one else believed, she stood alone." The fire crackled. The night seemed to lean in, listening. "And now," the girl whispered, "we remember." "Yes," the grandmother said, "because stories hold power. And Nia's taught us the most powerful thing of all, that even the darkest curse can be lifted by light from the smallest heart." Above them, the stars shone, quiet witnesses to a story once feared, now cherished. And the little girl, cradled in starlight and story, began to dream not of monsters but of guardians. Not of silence but of truth.